Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back here to another episode of Intuitive Angling, and thanks a lot for spending some time with me today and watching the video. Always grateful to have you guys around here. Guys, today we're going to be talking about the Bassmaster Classic going back to Grand Lake for the third or fourth time, and really the devastating effect that it's had on the lake over the long term ever since they've been having classics there and other big tournaments. And I really want to go into this video in detail here because I've been fishing Grand Lake since 1969. I'm going to give you guys a little bit of my history on the lake, and I've seen the evolution of the lake. I've seen what's happened to it, and this is the Bassmaster Classic coming back here is not a good thing for the lake. I'm going to explain why in this particular video here. Also, guys, I just wanted to thank everybody that has taken time to hit that subscribe button on the channel. Really appreciate that. And thank each and every one of you guys that have been using my tackle warehouse link in the description to purchase your tackle. Guys, that's really helping me and my family out a lot. So thank you very much for you guys that are using that link to order your tackle in the description. Really appreciate that. Okay, guys, if you see the thumbnail that I put up there, that picture that's a picture of me from 1968 down at Grand Lake. That was the first fish I ever caught at Grand Lake. I remember Dad took me down there in our little 16-foot Starcraft with our 28 horsepower motor, and I caught those two white bass trolling a swimming minnow, which is sort of like a lipless crankbait. Back then it was called a swimming minnow. And I caught those two fish right where Edwin Evers won the Bassmaster Classic up Elk River a few years ago, which was my secret honey hole for 40 years on the lake until Edwin gave it away to the world when he won the tournament there, which it was horrifying to me to see where he was catching them at. But that part of the Grand, that was my stomping grounds because that was so close to Joplin where I lived. It was only like a 35-minute drive from my house in Joplin to get there. So anyway, let's talk a little bit about this. I'm going to explain to you guys the devastating effect that the Bassmasters Classic has had since it's been coming to Grand Lake here, and I'm going to explain why in the bigger picture what has happened since it started coming there. First of all, I want to quantify this, guys, to say that I have earned the right to critique this, and I've earned the right to talk about Grand Lake. Like I said, I started fishing the lake in the late 1960s. In the mid 70s, we had a friend that some of my parents' best friends, they had a little cabin on Grand Lake right there close to Sailboat Bridge that we'd go down and visit. And he had a little dock, crappie fish off the dock. And in 1975, my mom and dad there was a little trailer park at the top of the hill, like a little mom and pop resort. And my mom and dad bought a trailer house there in the resort and had that trailer house for over 30 years at Grand Lake. So for over 30 years, every weekend we'd load up, drive down there and spend the weekend fishing, playing around on Grand Lake, and when I got old enough to drive, when I turned 16, I'd go down there every weekend with my little flat bottom boat. I've spent thousands and thousands of days on Grand Lake bass fishing. So I've seen the lake over the past 50 years, and there's very few people that have seen the lake for as many years and experienced the fishing there as I have on there. Now, what has happened is Grand Lake it's a shadow of the fishery that it used to be. Guys, back in the 70s and 80s and even into the early 90s, Grand Lake was an exemplary fishery. That lake was full of 3 and 4 pound bass that were highly catchable. You could basically go about anywhere you wanted to on the lake and just throw a crankbait or flip a jig and throw a spinnerbait and catch good bags of fish. There were tournaments. This was, like I said, 70s, 80s, 90s. There were tournaments that were won all over the lake, one up the river, run right around Sailboat Bridge. And most of the people that caught big bags of fish caught them just basic bass fishing, throwing spinnerbaits around lay down logs on the bank, flipping boat docks, cranking rocky banks with crankbaits, all that type of stuff. And full of good fish out there. What happened, the worst thing that ever happened to Grand Lake was the Wolf Creek facility when it was built there. And I'm going to say one thing about it, guys. The town of Grove, the convention center and the tourism bureau is no friend to Grand Lake. They could give a crap less about the sustainability and the quality of the fishing on that lake. It's been my experience and the observation of experience of a lot of people that have loved the lake and known it as long as I have, that they see Grand Lake as nothing more than a cash cow to bring revenue into the town, without any regard to what the sustainability and the quality of the fishery is going to turn out to be in regards to that, because there's no limits on tournaments. It's just whoever wants a tournament, come on down. I don't care how big it is, it's 500 boat big bass tournament, whatever, 20 tournaments on the lake in a weekend, the more the merrier. And what happened is, ever since that Wolf Creek facility went in, which there wasn't really a big facility on the lake prior to that, which was great because it kept big tournaments off of Grand Lake, and it kept the quality of the fishery, very, exemplary again. Once that Wolf Creek facility went in, and once the Bassmaster Classic came to Grove right after that facility went in, that was the death blow to Grand Lake, because what it did is it brought in every freaking circuit from around the country for the next 10 years, just freaking devastated Grand Lake. It was just every weekend, multiple tournaments, tons of dead fish in the summer tournaments, relentless fishing pressure. And ever since that first Bassmaster Classic, and when the Wolf Creek facility went in, anyone that fishes the lake as much as I have, and all you dudes out there that live on Grand Lake and know Grand Lake, you know what I'm talking about, the fishing has never been the same. It has continued to go downhill every single year. And that's why when they announced that the Bassmaster is going back again to the Bassmasters Classic, and then they've announced they're bringing the Bass National Championship back there this fall, I just got a sick feeling in my stomach, because all this is going to do, guys, is going to take the fishing down another notch on the lake that it's already down, way down there. The notches have been taken out many times. Not from that one tournament, but what's the Classic does. The Classic brings notoriety to Grand Lake, which brings other tournament circuits in there, other tournaments, more tournaments. And the fact that you don't have anybody that is a responsible, there's nobody at Grand Lake that is in the position of power as far as issuing tournament permits, that is being the adult in the room. It's like a free-for-all. There's nobody says like, okay, guys, you guys are not going to have 10 tournaments on the lake this weekend. If you want a tournament, you can have one tournament per weekend, then schedule your tournament some other time during the year. But we're not going to put these big tournaments, on top of each other every single weekend. You don't have anyone regulating that. It's just like, more the merrier, bring them on in, we'll make room for them, to hell with the bass. We don't really care. So anyway, what has happened with that is, ever since the Classic started coming there and more tournaments, you started noticing a constant decline in the fishery. And also with that, during that whole period, you started noticing a noticeable decline in the habitat. Guys, I spent years down there planting willow trees on those mud banks at Grand Lake, because Grand Lake used to be one of the best willow flipping lake in the entire, this part of the country. That's where I learned to flip at, was at Grand. The very first tournament I ever fished with my mentor, Terry Thomas, we flipped willows and won the tournament with 28 pounds back in the early 80s. So I planted a lot of willows, and what happened is, about the time that this whole Wolf Creek facility went in and the Classic there was an explosion in development on the lake. And these damn developers went in there, and they'd go through all these flat, gravelly, small rock type banks that have gradual slopes down to the water, bought up the property, bulldozed all the willow trees out of there, all the buckbrush, all the willow trees, so everybody that had their multi-million-dollar homes could have a view of the lake. And in essence, it destroyed probably 80% of the willow tree and buckbrush habitat on the lake since that Wolf Creek facility went in. So you've got an increase in fishing pressure. You've got the number of fish have been reduced tremendously in the lake. You've got a lot of pollution running into the lake. You've got companies that are dumping these point source pollution in the lake get off with a slap on the wrist. So the water quality issues have been a real problem. And it never ends out there. It's a prime example of overuse that we're seeing on Grand Lake here. So anyway, what is going to be the solution with this? Because on top of that, with everything else, the whole introduction of forward-facing sonar has even, devastated it even more out there, because what you have now is every tournament that you have at Grand Lake, you have a top-heavy tournament. You've got the top 2 or 3 guys that catch good bags of fish, and then if you look down to 40th, 50th, 60th place, the weights drop off to next to nothing there. That's the way Grand Lake is, and the way that you judge a fishery, guys. You don't judge a fishery by how much weight it takes to win a tournament. You judge a fishery by what the weights are on the bottom of 25% of the field, because that's more of an accurate representation of what the average angler is going to experience. And Grand Lake is a top-heavy type tournament, and it continues to be so, even more so with forward-facing sonar. Make no mistake about it, guys. I can save you time from watching the Bassmasters Classic. The Bassmaster Classic is going to get won just like every other tournament's going to get won this year, and every tournament's been won so far this year. It's going to get won spotlighting for bass with a spotlighting minnow, possibly a jerkbait, down on the lower end of the lake. That's how it's going to get won. Anyone that tries to fish the bank, traditional bass fishing techniques, is going to get their butt kicked. That the way Edwin Evers won the tournament down there, flipping a jig up on root wads up in Rock River, it's never going to happen again as long as you got spotlighting legal out there. So this tournament is going to get one spotlighting with probably a decent catch, which is going to again create the illusion that Grand Lake is okay and healthy, but it's not. Because here's the thing about it, guys. If you would take, tournaments, say for example, you go back to 1990, fishing Grand Lake, where every single tournament, it took 20 pounds to win every tournament. And lots of people would catch good bags of fish. And you would catch your fish on a white and chartreuse spinnerbait, flipping a black and blue jig, throwing a Model A crankbait on rocky banks, and you could go about anywhere and catch good bags of fish. If you try to fish like that in 2024 at Grand Lake, you are going to finish in dead last in the tournament if you're not spotlighting. If you're not spotlighting, prior to spotlighting, what happened is the fishing got so terrible at Grand Lake that the only people that ever did good anymore down there were the locals that had homemade brush piles, and they were baiting their homemade brush piles with dog food, which is sort of a gray area out there. Those are the people that was winning tournaments out there. So from that standpoint, that's what you're going to see in this particular tournament. It's going to be spotlighting tournament. Nobody else is going to be catching anything with that. And here's another thing about it. One of the things that people always bring up to me, it's like when I talk about how the fisheries have been degraded and they're not near as good as what they used to be, they say, "Oh, Randy, that's just part of the cycle of the life cycle of a lake. It goes through areas where you have peaks when a lake is young and a certain age, then it drops off." Guys, that's not true. Grand Lake was built 80 some years ago. So the peak times of fishing Grand Lake back in the 80s and 90s, the lake was still old. It was still 50 years old at that time. So you can't say that the lake has cycled. The lake sucks now because of too many tournaments. It sucks because of too much fishing pressure. There's simply not the fish in Grand Lake that there used to be. If you try to fish where those fish have been for the past 40 years at Grand Lake, every single year, you're not going to catch crap. The only way that you're going to catch anything in these tournaments to amount to compete in a tournament is spotlighting for bass or fishing brush piles that have been sweetened up with dog food. If you try to fish normally, you're not going to catch anything out there. So the point is, guys, is I don't share anyone's excitement about the Bassmaster Classic coming back to Grand Lake. I think it's the worst thing that the lake could possibly have done to it. Why does tournament organizations like Bass and MLF continue to have these big events at the same venues over and over? How many times have they been to Lake Hartwell? How many times did they used to go to the James River? How many times did they go to Grand Lake? When you put that type of exposure and that notoriety on a body of water, it can't sustain itself. It's like a death blow to that fishery when you exploit it through too many tournaments and too much exposure out there. And and the problem we have with this, guys, there's no entity out there that is a regulatory agency on these tournaments to do the right thing. It's not. The only thing that determines any of this stuff we're talking about is money. How much money the Chamber of Commerce, the tourism department is going to pay the tournaments to come in there. How much money they're going to be subsidized by different type of sponsors. It's like, I wish that we could eventually transcend the level that we're at the sport right now, where money doesn't have such an influence. Because anytime that you put money into fishing like that, I mean, I've never seen anything benefit from it. You know, I've never seen anything benefit in a fishery in terms of the sustainability and the quality of a fishery from exploiting it from tournament use out there. So, like I said, I just sick to see it, man. And here's another thing about it. It's just like when I talk about Grand Lake. I love Grand Lake, man. Grand Lake and Table Rock Lake is where my passion as a bass angler started. That's where my fondest memories of my life, period, were down at Grand Lake, loading up my truck after going to work or after getting out of school and going down there and spending the weekend with Grand Lake, fishing with my buddies, man, catching fish down there. I've been fishing that lake and, you know, taking care of that lake, picking up trash off the lake, you know, putting cover in that lake before all these dudes that are in charge of the lake right now were even born out there. So from that standpoint, I'm bitter about it, man. I'm bitter of what has happened to Grand Lake, because I was there during the heydays of it, and the heydays could still be there, except we have too many damn tournaments. I've always said that. I'm a tournament fisherman, and I'll tell you right now, we have too many tournaments. The tournament should be a lot highly more regulated than what they are in terms of numbers of tournaments. We shouldn't be having any tournaments during the spawn. There's a lot of things that we can do. And then every time I say that, people say, oh, Randy, well, why you're fishing the tournament, so you're part of the problem. When you're a tournament fisherman, you don't have any other choice. That would be like saying you don't like something that your boss said, so you're just going to quit your job simply because your boss offended you or something like that. Sometimes your anglers are put in the position to do the things that the tournament organizations make them do. You know, it's not a democracy, it's a dictatorship when you're talking about stuff like that. So it's frustrating to me that as a tournament fisherman, I'm put in the position where I have to do that. Everyone else is, because again, tournament fishing does not have, you know, regulations in it like other sports do that look at the sport from a higher perspective and from the bigger picture beyond just a profit margin out there. So anyway, guys, like I said, Grand Lake, like I said, it's going to take a hit after this tournament, like it always does. It's going to take a bad hit. Tournament's going to get one spotlighting, absolutely, 100%. No use to even pay attention to after it's over, because that's what it's going to be. Yeah, check back with me, just like you check back with me. I've correctly predicted the first two tournaments, the Lake Fork and the Toledo Bend tournament. I'm also going to correctly predict this one. So that's where we're at, guys. That's what our sport is now. Our sport is nothing but forward-facing minnows and forward-facing sonar. Any knowledge that you've accumulated over the past 30 or 40 years in terms of seasonal movements and bass movement and behavior, bass personality, understanding casting angles, understanding boat positioning, understanding how subtle weather patterns affect fish movement and how they bite, whether their levels of aggressiveness on shallow water, that's worthless to you. It doesn't make it, you might as well you've wasted your time learning that, because the only thing that you need now is to get you a damn $50,000 setup on your boat, get you some forward-facing minnows, get you a couple jerk baits, and turn on your damn video game. That is bass fishing, thanks to MLF and thanks to Bassmaster for creating that. It's nobody created that but them. Guys, they're the ones that could put an end to it. The only reason that I'm having to do these videos all the time and that everybody's, you know, in a big hoo-ha and a big uproar about that is because Bassmaster and MLF continues to enable that bad behavior. And until we get past that, until we have tournament organizations that say, okay, number one, we're not going to allow forward-facing sonar. Number two, we're going to be more responsible about how we schedule our tournaments. Number three, we're not going to be scheduling tournaments during the spawn. We're not going to be scheduling tournaments during the post-spawn when those fish are weak. We're going to start focusing our efforts on maintaining the sustainability and the tradition and the heritage and the magic and the therapeutic value for what fishing is. But right now you have a bunch of foxes guarding the hen house when it comes to our lakes out there. And just like my buddy said, I got one of the wisest buddies I've ever been around in my life. He says he's got such, chunks of wisdom one time. He always says, he goes, man destroys everything they touch. And that's what they're doing with Grand Lake right now. Man is destroying everything they touch at Grand Lake. I've seen them destroy the quality of fishing on the lake simply to bring more money into the Chamber of Commerce. That's all there is to it with that. The quality of fishing at Grand Lake is, again, a shadow of itself based upon the fact of irresponsible tournament scheduling and irresponsible, management of the tournaments, and not holding polluters to account. A lot of different things. Not putting enough limitations on issuing building permits on the lake, for habitat loss. So it's a lot of problems with it, man. But anyway, sucks to see Classic going back to Grand Lake. If you guys are excited about it, I don't share your excitement. I don't share your excitement as somebody that loves that lake. Probably, I can guarantee you more than you do, because like I said, Grand Lake is where my love of fishing started. And I feel like I've always been like a protector of the lake, man. And I hate to see what's happening to it now, because it's tragic. So anyway, hope you guys are well. We'll talk later.